Every part of this story is connected, and the meaning will only unfold fully if you stay with it until the end. Somewhere in this journey, a sentence or a pause might touch something in you, or remind you of someone you care about. If it does, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment. Sometimes, the words you share might be exactly what someone else needs to feel a little less alone. Some conversations exhaust you before you say a word. There are rooms that speak before anyone opens their mouth. He stepped into one, and before the first word, before the first glance, his spine adjusted. The shift was automatic, not a conscious reaction, but an old physical protocol. Soften your posture, breathe shorter, become less visible. Not out of fear, out of adaptation. No one said anything offensive, no hostility, but something inside contracted. A familiar fatigue settled in the neck, in the jaw, in the way he held his shoulders. This was a room where energy wasn't taken, it was assumed. And like many times before, his presence began to shrink. Not because he was weak, but because that's what the atmosphere expected. Nietzsche would observe, most people don't recognize the spaces that weaken them because they confuse tension with connection. They remain present where they are expected, even if that presence erodes them. And slowly, they lose their axis, not because someone broke it, but because they offered it piece by piece. The body notices first, and when it does, you don't owe it an explanation. You owe it clarity. He didn't leave abruptly. He didn't resist. But he knew. This space required more than it returned. And calm was not available here, not because he lacked it, but because the environment rejected it. The room was structured to feed on performance, not presence. That was enough. No argument. No performance of withdrawal. Just a shift in posture. A refusal to merge. Not defiance, precision. Staying calm with people begins not with technique, but with the ability to detect what's incompatible with your stability. And the first act of strength is choosing not to internalize the rhythm of a place that does not know how to hold stillness. The one who has learned to stay silent is no longer playing someone else's game. He used to respond immediately. Words came quickly, not because they were needed, but because silence felt like weakness. A question, a raised eyebrow, a subtle accusation, and he would react. Clarify, correct, manage the impression others might have of him. But now he waits. The change didn't happen because of a philosophy. It came from fatigue, from noticing that his fastest reactions always came from discomfort, not clarity. The moment someone challenged him, his body moved first, jaw tightened, eyes narrowed, breath caught in his throat. And the words that followed weren't truth, they were tension. Now, in the same kind of moments, he does nothing. He hears the tone, feels the pull, but lets it pass. His body still registers it. Tight chest, pulse in the neck, but his voice does not respond. He allows the discomfort to finish its course without acting on it. And slowly, a new kind of authority emerges. One that doesn't announce itself. Nietzsche would note, the man who does not react immediately is not frozen. He is focused. The silence between the provocation and the reply is where power grows. The refusal to entertain the terms of another's rhythm. That's where presence consolidates. People notice. Some become unsettled. Others push harder. But he doesn't adjust. His stillness isn't a tactic. It's a decision not to waste energy on what doesn't deserve completion. The absence of reaction is not absence of thought. It's the presence of sovereignty. And the real shift happens after. The breath is deeper. The spine holds straighter. The face is unbothered not because it's numb, but because it is no longer required to prove anything. That's the beginning of discipline. The face that watches, not to judge, but to remain. If you no longer need to be right, you've started breathing. There was a time when he couldn't leave a point unresolved. If someone misread him, he corrected. If someone disagreed, he explained. If someone challenged, he pushed back. Not out of ego, but out of fear that silence would be taken for defeat. That not responding would mean surrender. Now he speaks less. Not because he's unsure, but because being right has lost its urgency. He hears something unfair. A comment with an edge. A twist in the facts. His body tenses. Reflex still lives in the chest and shoulders. But the voice stays behind the teeth. And in that pause, something shifts. He no longer interprets silence as weakness. He sees it for what it is, a form of filtration. Nietzsche might say, the one who always needs to explain has not yet outgrown the child's need to be seen as good. But the one who observes, and chooses not to engage, has recognized the limitation of other people's narratives. And he no longer builds his center around their approval. Sometimes he says, I hear you. Sometimes he says nothing. Not from coldness. From clarity. Truth doesn't need applause. And certainty doesn't need consensus. There is no need to argue when you no longer outsource your identity to others. There is no need to dominate when your calm is not negotiable. In the past, disagreement felt like threat. Now, it's just information. He leaves conversations earlier, responds slower, sometimes not at all. The goal is no longer to win. The goal is not to scatter his voice in places that don't recognize its weight. And this is what changes everything. His words are fewer, but they land with more weight, because they are no longer competing. They are simply his. The body notices what the mind has learned to ignore. He thought he was calm. He said all the right things. Voice steady, posture composed. But his stomach turned. His jaw was locked. After the conversation ended, his back ached, not from sitting, but from restraint. He had mistaken suppression for composure. On the surface, everything looked fine. Inside, everything screamed. The body tells the truth before the mind admits it. In meetings, during difficult talks, in social situations, he had trained himself to be neutral, to manage discomfort, to remain the balanced one. But neutrality built on repression is just internal chaos disguised as control. Nietzsche would observe, man does not transcend tension by ignoring it. He transcends by confronting the source. And most never do, because they think control is a virtue, not a symptom. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the energy of always holding it in, of keeping the jaw tight so no disagreement escaped, of folding the hands so no gesture betrayed how much he wanted to walk out. So he began to track it, not intellectually, physically. After every interaction, he asked, what hurts? Where did I tighten? What was I afraid would show? And slowly, he stopped pretending. When a space demanded false peace, he gave it less presence. When his chest tightened, he left. When the handshake felt forced, he let his own hand stay cold. He no longer shaped himself to meet comfort. He began to protect the truth of his nervous system. Control, he saw, is useful only when chosen, not when reflexive. And sometimes, stillness isn't strength. It's residue. Real calm is not the absence of movement. It's the absence of self-betrayal. The strongest no is behavior, not a phrase. He no longer explains why he won't attend. He doesn't draft long messages to justify his absence. He simply does not show up. There is no anger in it. No silent protest. Just absence. He once believed that respect meant clarity. That every no had to be softened, wrapped in reasons, followed by reassurance. I wish I could, but the phrase of a man trying to make his absence less offensive. But now he understands. People who demand explanations are often those who refuse to accept your limits unless you make them feel good about them. Nietzsche would say, your life is not a courtroom. You owe no one your defense unless you wish to stand trial. He draws boundaries now with action, not arguments. He doesn't revisit conversations that should have ended. Doesn't respond to invitations that carry obligation instead of intention. Doesn't return energy where there is only extraction. People notice. Some ask questions. Others withdraw. Most recalibrate. Because when presence is no longer guaranteed, its value becomes unmistakable. He doesn't try to correct their interpretation. If silence offends them, let it. If distance confuses them, let it. Their discomfort is not his burden to manage. What changed was not his availability, but his ownership of it. He doesn't make a scene. He doesn't post about boundaries. He doesn't warn people about the new him. He just leaves earlier, responds slower, forgets to explain. Not from arrogance, from precision. In a world trained to value noise, boundaries spoken without noise are often the most disruptive. And he's fine with that. When you stop helping, some people leave on their own. He was always the one who listened. The one people called late at night, when everything collapsed, again. The one who stayed on the phone longer, who found the words, who carried the emotional weight others didn't want to hold. It felt noble, useful, a role worth keeping. Until one day, he noticed something. After these conversations, he felt hollow. Not proud, not fulfilled. Hollow, not because helping was wrong, but because it was always expected. There were no questions about how he felt. No curiosity about his exhaustion. He wasn't a person in these dynamics. He was a function, a predictable answer to someone else's crisis. So he stopped. Not dramatically, not with a speech. He just didn't reply right away. Didn't rush to save, to soothe, to analyze. He gave space, and watched what happened. Nietzsche would say, you don't owe people the weight they refuse to carry themselves. And in this, he found peace and distance. Some disappeared, not because they were offended, but because they were never connected to him, only to what he did for them. They needed his energy, not his presence. And once the energy was no longer automatic, they had no reason to stay. He felt no bitterness. Because this time, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like clarity. And what remained? The few who reached out without needing anything. That was real. You cannot hold your ground while constantly holding others. Some must learn to stand without your hand. And if they never do, that is not your loss. Helping should never come at the cost of being seen. And those who only take will call your boundary cold. Let them. You were never theirs to drain. What you suppress isn't weakness, it's a decision. It was the kind of comment that used to ignite him. A sharp tone, a subtle dismissal, a challenge disguised as a joke. He felt it land, not in the mind, but in the chest. Old reflexes stirred, words rising to defend, sarcasm loading, the body bracing for conflict. And then nothing. He paused, not because he didn't have a response, but because he no longer needed one. His hand stayed still, jaw unclenched, eyes steady, not frozen, aware. There was a time when every slight demanded correction. Every tension needed resolution. Every false assumption had to be dismantled. But now, he sees it. Not all provocations deserve your fire. Some just want your heat, not your truth. And every time you react, you enter their arena, not your own. Nietzsche would say, the man who resists the urge to respond is not passive, he is sovereign. The reaction rose, and he let it dissolve. Not swallowed, not buried, just observed, like a spark that never found air. And in that moment, he didn't feel small. He felt clean. Power, he realized, is not in the comeback. It's in the refusal to perform. He walked away without a word. No drama, no wound, no tension left to carry home. And what was left behind? Their expectation, their confusion, none of it followed him. He didn't suppress his truth. He just chose not to donate it. There's a discipline in stillness. Not the stillness of fear, but the stillness of no longer offering yourself to every invitation to battle. Let some things die, especially the ones that were never yours to keep alive, that if your calm no longer depends on others, you've returned to yourself. He stands in the same kind of room as before. The same tone, the same undercurrents, the same people circling, looking for a response. But this time, nothing in him leans forward. Nothing tenses. He's not frozen, he's whole. There's no forced smile, no polite laughter, no performance. They speak. He hears, but he doesn't enter. There is no effort to adjust, no anxiety to be understood, no compulsion to win favor. He is no longer there to be processed. He is simply present. Nietzsche would not call this detachment. He would call it arrival. In the past, his body would betray him. Muscles strained, breath shallow, the mind running simulations of what to say, how to correct, how to defend. Now, everything is slow. The nervous system quiet. The weight of others no longer enters without permission. He watches the moment unfold like watching distant weather, aware but untouched. This isn't arrogance. It's the end of overexposure. The choice to no longer be accessible to every demand. The understanding that not every space deserves your openness, and not every person is entitled to your alignment. They still try. They press. They provoke. But there is no handle on him anymore. No reflex they can access. His calm has no latch. He leaves when he wants, speaks when it serves, stays when it feels right. And when he walks away, he takes nothing with him but himself. That is the measure of presence. Not how much space you take up, but how little of yourself you give away unconsciously. The stillness that lives in him now is not silence. It is structure. It is not an absence of feeling. It is containment. It is not emptiness. It is self. He no longer waits to be treated right to feel at peace. He simply is.